welcome everyone. Thank you so much for doing this with us. We are so grateful that you can sit down together and talk about what's going on. And please feel free to, if you're, whoever, when we direct it to someone, it's because that's who we think wants to answer it. But of course we understand that there could be, you know. So I'm gonna let Charlie pick it up.
Hey, I appreciate it. Thank y'all for being here, and congratulations on winning the trial of the century. How does it feel?
Amazing. I mean, somewhat vindication, because I know that a lot of people just didn't think that this would happen. And I think for me, as the Attorney General, I think the biggest compliment I've received is that the number of people in this community and in this state who did not think that a conviction was possible because there were two justice systems, and that this office and this team played a role in basically changing people's perceptions of that. And to me, that was vindication.
I think that you know, it's easy right now. It was hard, and now we're, you know, a little bit removed from that verdict. It was really kind of hard at first, but it's a little bit easier now. But we have to remember that, you know, while we certainly are grateful and feel like we've done a good job, you know, what this is all about was an extremely terrible event, and you know, we always try to focus on that. I think the biggest relief for me, though, was when I heard that guilty verdict, was that I didn't put all these folks through a ton of work for nothing. And I think we would have been happy with whatever happened, but it certainly is a lot better to be sitting here right now in this sort of situation than the other.
Extraordinary. I'd like to also just kind of take us back to when, and I think pretty much the beginning of when you started to hear about that there could be a prosecution. When did you get this case?
Yeah, that's a good question, because it's a conflict case, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the first 2 months, it was with the local solicitor's office, and then General, I think he sent you a letter on August 11th, I believe.
I had been having conversations with the local solicitor about taking this case early during the summer, but wanted to wait and give SLED and local law enforcement and the solicitor's office a chance to evaluate it. You know, I didn't want to just jump in and take something. So I wouldn't give them the opportunity to let this thing kind of unfold naturally and organically. And so from June the 7th till I think around August the 11th is when I got the letter and the call from Solicitor Stone. Our office was not involved, but then I got that call and from Duffy Stone, and then got the letter, and then we met with SLED, and then I think a couple of days later I met with Creighton and we assigned it to him.
Yeah, I think it was September actually.
It might have been 2 weeks after.
Yeah, it was a few weeks, and then the side of the road happened, and you know, our first thought was, okay, there's something more to this story, and so, you know, we're in the state grand jury room right now, and this is you know, complex investigations is kind of what all these folks do, and so we you know, the first question we had is, what's going on here? And as we started to investigate that in this very room and put all that together, as well as, you know, SLED, you know, working on that, as well as the murders, and just things started to converge together.
Any thought getting it to another solicitor?
I'll take that question. I actually had a number of people come to me early on in this process, and I think they were well-intentioned, but they would say things to me like, have you thought about giving this to a solicitor's office? They're better equipped to handle these high-profile murder cases, and you know, this isn't really something that the AG's office does. And I know they meant well, but I really took offense to that. And what you can see in retrospect is that I think this office was perfectly equipped for the level of complexity that this case presented to the world. And I think right now we have put an exclamation point, or I should say we have slammed the door on this idea that the Attorney General's office is not equipped to handle high-profile murder cases. In fact, we're the best equipped to do it.
Yeah. We do high-profile stuff all the time, and you know, I started my career working for Zelenka doing you know, murder appeals. I was an appellate lawyer to start out with, and well, we do try murder cases here. This is not the first one that we've done, and but you know, fundamentally, a trial is a trial, a case is a case, and you know, complexity is something that we're used to, and this situation is obviously unique, like nothing I think any of us will ever see again. But it was something that all these folks, I think, were born to do and excited to do, and we're thankful that, you know, we had the result we have, and we still have a ways to go.
And talk about this a little bit, because we're here in a statewide grand jury in Columbia, South Carolina, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the financial crimes were handled through the statewide grand jury
In this room.
in this room.
Well,
But the
indicted
murder
in this room,
case
investigated.
never, didn't go through here because it was the local Colleton County grand jury heard that.
Sure, but I'll say this,
If you could explain maybe the
So-
background of the statewide grand jury and how it interplayed, how it helped you with this particular case.
Well, this is, again, these things all relate together. Obviously, I think there's been a lot of talk out there about the financial crimes and all the rest of it, but, we don't make the facts, we just uncover the facts. And, our goal, as we started to look at this, this was, in our opinion, not coincidental. The insane amount of pressures, I think I called it a hamster wheel, that this man had been living on for the longest time. All these various factors were all converging on June the 7th. So let the jury decide. Is that a coincidence, or is that relevant when you're trying to answer the ultimate question as to what could motivate a man or cause a man to do this? I think the defense tried to make it a little bit more simplistic than what we were saying, that it was just, there was the boat case and the confrontation that morning. That's not what we were saying. We were saying that this guy had been on an exhausting journey of just constant fraud and staying just one step ahead of the game for over a decade, and finally he was running out of time. And guess what? That happened to be the day that his wife and son died.
The analogy I would use, I think if this was a series of movies, this would be a sequel beginning on June the 7th. And if you haven't seen the first movie, that provides context for what happened, that's kind of what we think people wanted. They didn't want to they didn't want to see the first movie. They just wanted to see the sequel. But you have to see the first movie to kind of understand the full context of the story narrative.
Do you think you could have done as well without the statewide grand jury, without the compelled transcript testimony and subpoena power of the statewide grand jury?
Well, but we didn't have to. I mean, it certainly makes it easier to gather records and bank records and that sort of thing. But we didn't. While we can subpoena and compel testimony, and we do subpoena people, I will say that initially people were, even after the side of the road, people were very reluctant, and I think that's very telling about the situation that existed down there and in this particular, the prestige and the power of this family. And I had a number of conversations with people saying, I can't tell this story without you. But I also can't promise you anonymity, and so I had to have that conversation a few times, and people were reluctant because they didn't want to take on this particular family. But I had to sit down and say, look, you're not going to be alone, but I also don't want to promise you an anonymity that will not last. And so I need you to tell your story and to do that. Now, I want to be clear. The financial crimes have not been resolved yet. Alec is presumed innocent of those, and he's entitled to a fair trial. And so while a lot of that came up in the murder trial, and so it's certainly something that we can talk about, those crimes remain to be resolved, and everyone is presumed innocent until they have that trial.
Yes, sir. Now you've got a terrific team of prosecutors assembled here. How did you allocate duties, responsibilities, and maybe they can speak to that from their perspective?
Let me start, and then I'll hand it to Creighton, because he's the one that actually built the team within the state grand jury. The analogy, I don't know if you remember the analogy I used, and I told Creighton this. I said the way I run this office is, if this were World War II, in this case were the storming of the beaches in Normandy, I would be FDR and he would be Eisenhower, right? And so I had the general idea of that. We needed to move forward in this case. I approved it. I signed off on the indictments, and then I signed my general here down the grand jury to move forward. And then it was during that process of the investigation, as it started to snowball, as the financial crimes became more and more complex and went back further and further and further, and things got bigger and bigger and bigger, the need to start handing out assignments, and all of a sudden it went from, I think you started off with just you and another attorney, and then it went to 3, and then started the snowball.
I kept coming to you and I said, I need the whole team, and
Done.
And done. And here's the thing, and I sat down with all these folks, and of course everybody involved is not in this room, and I want to be clear about that. Everybody, and you saw them all, they all had a huge role, and you saw them all shine. You saw some people taking their first at bat in the World Series, and they laced a base hit in the center field, and it was really amazing. But I also sat down with everybody early on, and I said, everyone is going to have a role in this. Everyone is going to, have a piece of this, and everybody's going to have ownership of this. And first of all, that ownership, and I think you saw it. You saw it in everyone here. You saw it in the people who are not here. You saw it in the staff members who did such an amazing job. My paralegal Carly Jewell and investigator Ozzie Toledo and Danielle and Shane and Carson Burney. Johnny James is not in here. John Conrad is not in here. All Trish was amazing, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But everybody, I said everybody's going to have a role of this, and so I just gave different people a particular role in this. And first of all, that was the only way I think for us to be successful, because you saw what amazing work that everybody did when they had ownership of whatever it was. But more importantly, that was the only way I was going to survive, because there's no way that I could have done it without all these folks. And the general could provided amazing support. And
Sorry, to expand on that, it came into my head to frame the question this way: when you guys are having your post meetings, your debriefs, all things like that, when you're sending your shout outs, your kudos, what are some specific things you're saying about Savanna, about David, about John, where they really excelled, what they did a really good job of to bring this case home for you?
Well, Savanna is, and I say this, is a pit bull. I mean, she absolutely, and maybe that's not the phrase that she wants. Maybe I'll think of a better one. But no, but she is. And so, obviously this crime scene, was a difficult crime scene. And I think we said, well, that's because this master manipulator was in charge of that crime scene. Savanna had the extremely tough job of doing that and managing that, and Ozzie also did great work on that as well. But that was the role to her, and she's such a hard worker, and that really was huge for me to have her doing that. David Fernandez is my number 2 in the state grand jury section. He is probably the most important ear that I have, and the most important voice in my ear, and so he was always just the person that I needed to, and then of course did amazing work, and his cross-examination of Sutton was just amazing, and I don't think anybody could have done a better job. John Conrad, who is a former Marine aviator, a Wizzo. He likes to call himself Goose. Well, he doesn't call himself Goose, but if you know the movie Top Gun, he's the guy. But he's got that technical expertise, and obviously he immediately just did such a great job of that timeline and the phone of it as well. And Rudolphski, authored that timeline, but with John's heavy input and supervision, and he did an amazing job of that. Johnny James is my white collar guru, and he and Carson just did such an amazing job in putting all that stuff together, and did great. And then of course we had the experienced superstar here, who I've known for many, many years. And when I started my appellate career, that's when I first met John. He had a couple of big cases that I was fortunate enough to handle the appeals on, and that's how we got to know each other and reconnected, as we do every year at the annual prosecutors conference. And we had been considering some other, some people, because we knew that this was going to be a really heavy lift, and having somebody like John come in as well was going to be clutch. The way we put it is that if you're making a run to the World Series, I use a lot of sports analogies, and there's a free agent bat out there, you go get them. And John certainly.
So let me interject, since you're using sports analogies. So John came late to the game. And so I went to the transfer portal, got a 5-star, but a lot of people thought that he was brought on for this case. This is a 5-star recruit. I've been trying to bring him into my program for years. The timing wasn't right before, and I think it was early fall. In fact, you and Don and the chief deputy, Jeff Young, were in the office, and we were talking, and I'm like, guys, we weren't even talking about bringing in an attorney for the Murdaugh case. We were just talking about what can we do to plus up the prosecution section. And I said, what about John Meadors? And Creighton was like, man, we were just at the solicitors conference, and we started talking. I'm like, we talked years ago, but John's just a 5-star. Everyone knows him. He's great. I think he could really round out our team, not just in the grand jury, but the whole prosecution division. And so I reached out to him, and over a couple of conversations, he was pursuing other ventures at the time, and we were able to bring him on. And then Creighton and I started talking. Creighton would be like, we could probably use him on the Murdaugh case. It would be stupid not to use him on the Murdaugh case. And I said, listen, if you want him and he's here, we'll plug him in. And he really, you didn't even get here till December.
Yes, sir.
So he came in really late in the process and caught up, and that's a testament to his ability.
How'd you get ready so quickly, John?
First of all, I want to thank everybody here for letting me be a part of this wonderful team, and I truly mean that. It was an honor. Timing's everything, and I was just fortunate enough to be in the right place. So thank all of you. I mean that, all of you. I work hard, read, but these folks here have done some great summaries. And as Creighton said, the support staff, the investigators, just were up on it, and they helped bring me up to date, and all that really helped. But justice was served in this case, and it really was an honor to be a part of it.
John, we were talking the other day when we were at the prosecutors conference, and he and I were hanging out, and as you do at the conference, and he said, well, I wasn't even thinking about this case and being involved, and I said, well, I was. And fortunately, it worked out.
To me, the key, I remember reading about the murder indictment. Was that a key moment where you decided, like, okay, we have evidence here to go forward with the serious charge against this prominent attorney? Tell me about that.
Well, it was actually in this room. SLED, obviously, I think the kennel video was found in April, like 2 months earlier, and I was aware of it, but I don't think I saw it until early July of last year. And it was a couple of us, you were there, SLED came over, Chief Keel was here, and they basically did a presentation up into the critical decision point to say, okay, this is what we think we have, and this is our theory of the case at this time.
I actually did a 40-slide PowerPoint in this room as we made that final decision,
That's right.
which I actually sanitized a good bit, which was one of the PowerPoints during the closing argument, but it was right up there on that screen as we kind of went through all of that and presented it to the command staff and the command staff for SLED. And at that point, the David Owen, the case agent, and the other agents involved, and we were like, hey bosses, we think it's time to go.
Great. It was his PowerPoint slide, if I'm the jury, he convinced me with that PowerPoint slide. And again, the slide included the entire trilogy, right? It included the prequel and the sequel. It included all of it, and it kind of framed the issue for me, which gave me a level of comfort that I can put my name on this indictment.
You made the decision, General, on that day.
I did. I made that decision.
Wow. Congrats. Death penalty? What was the thinking about not pursuing?
Well, I'll go ahead and, Creighton and I have had a lot of conversations. Our senior team had a lot of conversations about it, and there's a lot of factors that go into making a decision to go on the death penalty. Obviously, you got to consider the complexity of the crime. Obviously, I don't distinguish between circumstantial or direct evidence. They're just as equally important and helpful in making a decision on what happened. But, this is a heavily circumstantial case. You also had the efficacy of the death penalty. Obviously, I don't think there's been a death penalty carried out in South Carolina in about 11 or 12 years. Someone could be on death row for 20, 25 years or more. I'm a supporter of the death penalty, but you also have to look at the individual, and sometimes life without parole is a worse crime, or worse punishment rather, for an individual than the death penalty would be. And also, we wanted to be, I think the one thing, and Creighton stressed this, I'll give Creighton, he said, General, we have a family here, and it's a very unique case, and we have to be careful. And we obviously understand that this is a family that is both the victim of this horrible, horrific double murder and all that Alex Murdaugh did in the years leading up. They were left in the wake as well, but also they were sitting behind Alex, and a number of them were very supportive. And again, when you're considering the death penalty, asking for the state to take someone's life, you have to factor in victim impact. And so that was also weighing in my mind. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about a 6-week trial. It's already an extremely complex trial. You add the death penalty to it, and we're talking about maybe a 12-week trial, and you're really adding a level of complexity to it that in the end, didn't seem to be. The way that we needed to go. Also, again, as he said, the efficacy of the penalty. I mean, you're talking about probably 20 years at best before that would be even carried out. The cost is extreme. The resources that have to go into that. We wanted to try this case in Colleton County. I'm a firm believer that, a lot of people ask, why didn't you try to change venue? I'm a firm believer in, let the community where this happened have their voice on it. And but when you add capital jury selection to that, that's a whole level. And obviously you go into this, we know how much notoriety there was. Picking a fair jury is a huge thing, and adding the death penalty aspect to that just seemed to be taking what was going to be a difficult task and making it even harder, because there's a whole level of additional jury questions and selection that goes into that. So ultimately, the best way to go was to make sure that he never left prison again. And he's a 50-year-old man now in SCDC, and I think that that's the appropriate penalty for him.
General, what's 10?
Were you surprised?
I think.
Call Delinda, let her know I'll be a little bit late.
Quick question. Were you surprised, Judge Newman, was it a surprise that all the financial crimes were admitted by him to prove motive? Was that expected or surprised? Or?
I don't think so. We didn't have to, but we filed a motion early on and said this is what we're going to do. We let the defense know and we let the judge know. And Judge Newman is obviously an amazing judge, and you heard his ruling. He carefully considered it. This is a unique situation. It's just a very unique situation. And again, when you look at all the financial crimes, you can't really tell the story of the boat case or the Ferris fees without backing up and understanding, well, why is that important? Why is this such a risk to him? And when then you go back a year or two, and then, well, you can't tell that without telling the Satterfield story. And, well, you can't really tell why the Satterfield story was important without going back to all the previous victims. So there was really no way to tell that whole story and for the jury to really understand the context of all of that without telling the whole story. This is a unique situation and a unique individual. And, I think the judge considered all that very carefully and rightly ruled that the jury needed to understand who this man was. I think that's important to understand what could answer what is really a fundamental question is that what could have led what we thought about this man to get to where he was on June the 7th, 2021.
When we prosecute these cases, the state, if this is a game of poker, we play with an open hand. Obviously, our personal and interpersonal trial strategies might be we keep to ourselves, but we don't hide that. We let you see our cards. And I thought the judge, who in my opinion is the gold standard of judges, he was so methodical, so judicious, so careful. He let both sides, he would remove the jury when necessary so that both sides could air out. We would, obviously when we felt that the defense had opened the door to information that the jury would not otherwise be allowed to hear, the judge would send the jury out and he would hear both sides, and he would, we would make our legal arguments, factual arguments. He would weigh it carefully, and then he'd put on the record why he decided that based on previous court decisions. So we feel like the record has been sufficiently protected, and the judge allowed things to play out the way they were supposed to.
I know it seemed like a lot, and everybody has to remember we did those in-camera hearings. So people watching the trial are like, well, God, they keep doing this. Well, the jury didn't hear it the first time. And if you saw, even when we put in some of that evidence when the judge ruled it admissible, it wasn't as in much detail as we'd even done in camera, and really wasn't as much detail as it could have been. I don't want to say we pulled punches, but we were trying to walk a fine line of showing what was necessary for the jury to understand the full situation, but not, as the phrase I used was gilding the lily, which is a phrase I learned in oral argument in front of former Chief Justice Jean Toll, who was a great mentor for me. What better way to grow as a lawyer than have to do oral arguments in front of her and that entire bench. And so that was a phrase I learned. And so we're trying to walk that line where we adequately explain it to the jury in a summary fashion without going too far. And that's what we tried to do.
I do want to say something, because there was a lot of criticism, because people were watching this like it was a reality TV show, and we were living it as if it was a trial. And sometimes the sausage making, people want to have this trial delivered like a bacon cheeseburger. They don't want to see the cow and the pig butchered in the process. It's a messy process to make a bacon cheeseburger. Well, they had to see all of that to get to the end product. And there were days where they were probably wondering, why is this relevant? Or is this necessary? Or is it too much? Or as Creighton just said, we just heard this. Of course, they didn't realize the jury was not in the room when they heard it the first time. The judge had to make a determination on whether the information could be let in. So there were days when it was boring and it was tedious and it was monotonous. But we have to put that in order to make our final arguments. And also, we don't know what's important to the jury until we do now, having heard them do interviews, but when you're presenting the case, we don't know what is and what is not important. We know what we think is important, and what we need to do to be able to tell the story. But jurors latch on to different things, and different things are important to them. So we didn't have the last thing we wanted to do or not have done is not put information in, and then all of a sudden have the defense say, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, they didn't put in such and such, and therefore their case is flawed, and make that argument, and then have the jurors say, well, if we had heard such and such, then we might have ruled differently. We didn't want to, once they get the case, the die is cast. And so we had to put this information in, and I think Creighton and everyone sitting up here and those who aren't sitting up here did an amazing job putting it in there.
The analogy I made there was, and was trying to explain to our viewers a lot, was you had to tell us how to make the watch before you could tell us what time it was, to an extent. But dovetailing with that, and I think you've addressed this a little bit, trepidation, nervousness, and you feel confident. I have to feel like you all felt confident to an extent in the evidence that you had collected in the case you were presenting, but it also felt like a lot of dominoes had to fall to get what you were after with the Saturn, with the boat, with the Zero United, the Red Beer, all this contextual stuff. What was that feeling like for you all throughout the trial? These in-camera hearings are coming. That it's going to be decided. Is it a butterflies moment of coming up? Tell me about that. Creighton, we can start with you, but just was there the trepidation, the unknowns of going into each of those rulings from Judge Newman and knowing you needed those proverbial dominoes to fall?
Well, I think that the first thing you have to do, and I use a lot of sports analogies, is we know that we call this a Super Bowl, and you have to prepare, and you also know that there's things you can't control. The other team's not going to just let you score touchdowns; they're going to make their plays too. You're going to have days where you have an interception or a fumble, and also, as I said before, we don't make the facts, we just deliver the facts. And so you go in there and, I try to put all of that out of my mind. They say, with a quarterback, if you throw an interception, what's the first thing you do? Just forget about it and go back out there. And so, I didn't dwell on that too much. I can tell you that every single day, particularly sitting in that first chair when, every decision comes to you, there was never a moment of rest. And so, you outwardly, have to be confident, but you're under an extreme amount of stress from the moment the judge says bring the jury until my favorite words of the day was we'll be in recess. And then you have 30 minutes or 40 minutes to go back to the hotel room and kind of clear your head, and then you're back to work until midnight, and then you're up again. So you can't concentrate too much on things like that. All you can do is go in every single day and present the evidence and just have confidence that your point will get across, and that's what we tried to do.
And if I could add to that, I think it's a testament to the team Creighton put together too, because we were prepared for every eventuality. So if the judge, depending on his ruling, we were prepared to go forward one way, we were prepared to go forward the other way. The case would not have been disrupted had the judge made a ruling that was against us, because we would have just adapted and continued on with presenting, we'd modify our case as needed. But Creighton was making all these decisions. Obviously, we made, I think, a very effective argument as to why we think that evidence should be admitted. But had it not been admitted, we would have marched forward with a pretty strong case and adapted. And that's a testament to Creighton. We mapped out every possibility. So.
99 financial crimes still pending.
Yeah.
Thinking about 3 strikes and you're in, life without parole for Alex Murdaugh.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yes, 100%.
The legislature has defined breach of trust over $10,000 as a strike, and they made that decision. We don't make the laws either. We enforce the laws and apply those laws, and it's hard to conceive of a situation that if breach of trust over $10,000 is a strike, what other situation would it be more appropriate to use those strikes than this individual? And that has nothing to do with the murders. We're talking about somebody who allegedly has abused the trust that comes with that diploma and that certificate on the wall that we all have, and did so in a way that is, unparalleled, allegedly. And again, those remain to be determined. But I think that, based on this situation, again, what other situation would there be aside from the murders where someone deserves, seeking those strikes? And that's what we intend to do. Again, I always have to be very clear. He's presumed innocent of those and entitled to a fair trial, but we plan to aggressively pursue those under the General's leadership.
And again, echoing what Creighton said, presumption of innocence, but I believe that every victim of every crime deserves to have their day in court, regardless of where the defendant is. Because a lot of people say, well, he's in prison for life, so you've got him, so why are you going to waste our time? Well, he is irrelevant to their lives, or their families' lives. So they deserve their day in court, and we're going to pursue every case that involves every other victim. They get their shot, they get their day in court. And again, as a matter of strategy, we expect that we're going to defend the appeal. We expect him to be in prison for the rest of his life. But I would love to have that extra layer of basically to kind of insulate, appeal-proof this thing. So we definitely want him to put him up on those charges for those various reasons.
What are the 3 cases? Which 3 cases are you going to?
Well, we're going to handle all of them. We're going to handle all of them.
They go in that?
Well, so the way it's indicted is, the indictments are broken up in the various counties. As you know, in South Carolina, again, you have to venue the case in the county where, there's a connection. But those indictments are generally broken up by the various victims. There's multiple charges related to each one. And so each one of those is its own thing. And as the General said, those cases have their own importance and validity and their own alleged victims, and those need to and will be addressed, every single one of them.
And the order that they come in is a function of logistics and availability of the attorneys involved, and so we'll let that play out. We don't know yet.
We have just spoken with the trooper Tony Moore in an interview, and I know that he was specifically because he also was at the bond hearing as one of the victims, speaking to keep Alex Murdaugh back in jail back in over a year ago,
Right.
when he first was up for that. And that was really interesting to me. He was like, absolutely, I would testify if I was called as a witness.
I mean, he even told us he wants to.
He
was
wants
like,
to,
I really want them to.
Yeah, and as I said before, that was interesting because when we first started doing that, I think we had our first indictment in October, not November of 2021. And actually at the time, because of COVID, we were not doing grand jury in this room, state grand jury, we were doing it. And again, there's a distinction between state grand jury and county grand jury. Those are 2 very, very different processes. But we were actually doing it at the convention center down the road so we could have social distancing. So we were down there. So that's actually where the initial investigation and indictments were done, down there. Parking's a lot better down there, I'll say that. But it's like I said before. I mean, initially, you saw how we indicted it. We would work on some, and when we felt those were ready, we would present those to the grand jurors, and then they would indict, and then we'd go on to the next one and keep going because it was just too much. It was just too much to do all at once. And so ultimately, though, there was, like I said before, a lot of trepidation from people who just were not convinced that anything would ever happen. And I had those conversations. I had conversations in this room with people.
Well, maybe we should ask before FDR goes, if you let me.
I probably shouldn't compare myself to FDR, but
But it's a battle. That's
but the whole point I was trying to convey there, and I wasn't trying to elevate myself to that level. What I was trying to do is to say, I know I'm the boss of the office, but I have generals and colonels and lieutenants and such, and I have to trust them to be able to do their jobs. And the men and women sitting up here with me and the others who aren't here, I trust implicitly, and I trust this man. That's why I signed this case to him. And so I said, listen, I understand what my role is and understand my authority, but I have delegated that authority to you, and I'm not going to take it back.
But I do have to ask.
Sure.
Setting key witness, Dr. Ken Kinsey.
He did great on Kinsey, didn't he?
Yep, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm telling you.
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Ken Kinsey, and it's like a key, not like, it is a key critical moment in the State versus Alex Murdaugh, and the Attorney General of South Carolina stands up for this rebuttal direct examination of this key witness. I don't know if you noticed or not, but there were several spectators in the courtroom that took real notice. of the active role that the Attorney General is now playing. What went into that decision to go center stage in the most critical moment, or one of the most critical moments in one of the most critical trials in the history of South Carolina?
So I don't want to overplay that because I think there were lots of critical things that the people up here brought to the case that made the difference. I will say this, I made for great theater that the last case, or the last witness in the state's rebuttal case was done by me. That wasn't planned that way. You know, I had been there. First off, I want to go back and say why I was there to begin with. I came down, I think I got there, I had conflicts the first week. I couldn't be there for the jury voir dire and all of that and the openings, but I was there for the last 5 weeks. And the reason I chose to be there is a couple of reasons. This is a high stakes game here. This is a high stakes trial. The eyes of the world were watching. The office was under a microscope. I had 1,000% faith in the team going down there, but I knew that if things didn't go well, they were putting their necks out on the line. You know, and I said they need to see me putting my neck out on the line with them. So I was going to put myself there, and I was going down to not be the Attorney General, to be another staff attorney, and to be a support attorney to help the team out, and also to say, hey, I'm going to put myself out there with you. These folks are staying away from their families for 6 weeks. Real life is happening back home. Kids are getting sick. You know, loved ones are getting injured. You know, my wife was going through an ordeal at the time. They're going to be away from their families. I'm going to be away from my family. They're going to live in a hotel dorm room lifestyle for, we didn't know it would be 6 weeks, but they're going to be there for a month plus. I'm going to be there with them. As the case started to unpack itself, I went to Creighton because I knew Creighton was really pulling, he was bandwidth is at his ends. And I went to him and I said, hey, listen, I'm happy to continue being a support staff. I'm happy to continue sitting there and passing notes and doing research and giving ideas out. But if you want me to take a witness, if you want me to help out, I used to be a prosecutor, I used to do this and I enjoyed it. And so he says, well, if the opportunity presents itself, you will. And then I think the weekend before, we didn't even plan it to be the last witness. I went to him and said, listen, and I want to give credit to David Fernandez and Creighton Waters. Creighton took Kenny Kinsey in the state's chief case, and David is the one that did the cross on the defense expert that came up with those preposterous and ridiculous theories that the bandits were 5'2" to 5'4", and that there were 2 of them. And so what I did is, I was obviously there. I took copious notes for both his direct of Kenny and his cross of the defense's expert, and took very detailed notes and went back and rewatched their examinations and sat down with Kenny Kinsey and was able to come up with the idea of how we would tear apart the defense's theory and do that, do the gun in the doorway. And so it was just building blocks that they laid down for me. And again, it wasn't, my daughter was in the audience, but I didn't know that she was going to be there the day that I was going to take the witness. So it made good theater, but it wasn't planned that way.
I wrote a little sticky to him when he got through, and I said, you go, AG. It was great.
I have to give him a lot of credit. He was down there, but he never attempted to take over the room or anything like that. I got to joke. I got to be the boss of the boss for a while, and I know that there were decisions that we debated, and I went probably a different way than he would have. But that's a testament, I think, to his leadership in that role. As we moved into that last weekend, he had been so focused on that. He had been talking to Dr. Kinsey a lot, who's just an amazing witness, amazing person, and. We were coming off the cross of Alec. All of us were at the end of 6 weeks just exhausted, and the AG was laser focused on that. And he came to me and said, hey, man, I'll take him if you want. And that seemed to be the right decision because, again, I knew I've worked for this man for a long time. And one of the things that's great about that is that he has experience in this office. He has experience as a line-level prosecutor in the solicitor's office. General Condon, you were a solicitor as well. And so, we had a lot of confidence. And he was so focused on that, and you saw how well he did. So, that was, I'm sure I made a lot of wrong decisions along the way, but that was one of the right decisions in letting him handle that last witness, and it went really well.
And again, I thought it was helpful for the jury to hear a different voice. I mean, at the end of a very long trial, they've heard from all of these people. They've heard from the same attorneys over and over and over, and they were doing a great job. But I think anytime you hear see a new face and a new voice, people kind of sit up and say, okay, what's this person about? What's their presentation style? And I thought it would be helpful to have a different face. And the one thing I was concerned about, obviously, is that as the elected Attorney General of the state, you know, the last thing I want to do is have anyone hold their views of me as an individual against them. They're not political people. They're career prosecutors who just want to seek the truth and just want to do justice. And so I was very cognizant, and he and I talked about it. We didn't want to do anything that would distract from the case, which is why I kept a more muted position and let them do their jobs. But it worked out, and I was glad to be part of it. And I had a lot of fun, and it reminded me of why I love being a prosecutor.
Yeah, I mean, we were obviously, we talked about a lot of those issues, and that's a huge risk to an elected to get in there, because again, I've always joked with the general, and I don't want to overstate or use an analogy, but generals have lieutenants. We're the ones that do that sort of thing. So there was a big risk for that, but I mean, he just absolutely aced it, and but
Thanks, boss.
yeah, well, those days are gone now.
Yes, they are.
But anyway, no, there was that. But I think the thing was that as we talked about those issues, it wasn't like he was just going to parachute in. We didn't think, while it was such a huge moment, like you just said, when he stood up and people were like, wow, the Attorney General was going to do one. But he had been here the whole time, or the majority of the time, and so it seemed like. That there would not be, some sort of negative reaction to the Attorney General doing that, because he was part of the team, and clearly the jury had seen him be part of the team the entire trial.
And he may not want to disclose this, but really the secret to his success, I brought him a little thing of Jif every morning, peanut butter.
It was the peanut butter.
The peanut butter.
Yeah.
Well, we're doing a lot of plugs here. I mean, I'm not going to mention the
Kind bars, Jif peanut butter.
We'll
Wear
let
an
Jeff
ad on
know.
our suit.
Stevie
I
Burrow,
brought
brought
him
to you
tea
by.
and a protein bar every day. Well, you got hot tea every day.
But I will tell you, this is kind of behind the scenes for people. It was very interesting when you were packed in a courtroom and you were all there, the whole time, every day. And all of a sudden, all these national producers and personalities were there, and the criminal defense team, and we're all there, and you have a lot of the same spectators coming back, the court staff. And it was almost like it kind of came, I won't say like a family environment. It was like a family reunion every day. And you would see us being combative, but then all of a sudden we would break, and everyone would just be talking about, family stuff or, life. And it was kind of interesting, and it was honestly kind of sad when it ended. I'm glad that it ended. But, you got into that routine every single day of seeing the same people, and you got to be friends with people, and that was kind of fun.
And that's something I thought about, is that when we walked out of that court the last day, is that this group of people, and there's so many. I mean, we've talked about the SLED agents and the amazing job they did, and they're a huge part of the team. And then of course all the team that we have, and then not only that, we've got Miss Becky and all the clerk staff and the bailiffs and Colleton County Sheriff's folks, and then just the various people who were there. And as I walked out of that courtroom the last time, I realized none of us, it will never happen again that all of us will all be in the same room again. It just won't, and that is a little sad, because we made a lot of friends down there, and when you go through something like that, there's a connection I think that we'll always have. But it is a little nostalgic to think that that group of people that was in that room every day will never all be in the same room.
Right. I do want to say this as a parting thought. I don't even know if this will make it to the editing room floor, but I've never been more proud to be the Attorney General of South Carolina in the wake of this, because it showed not only the state but the world that this office can send a signal to people who doubted the system, who had trouble believing that this was possible, that we sent a message to everyone out there who doubted, and maybe renewed their faith that no one is above the law. No matter who you are, what your station in life or society is, no one is above the law. And not only the men and women that are up here and those who aren't represented today, but there were a lot of men and women who weren't part of this trial that kept the wheels of justice spinning back home. There was a double murder case conviction, a big case that would have been a high-profile case had it not been for the Murdaugh case. Those people weren't getting the recognition they deserve. And I just want to say how incredibly proud I am of the work of the men and women of this office. And one of the greatest, other than being a father and a husband, being the Attorney General of this office and working with these people is one of the greatest amazing gifts I've ever been given in life, and I'm so proud to be part of it and be part of this story, even if it is just a little footnote. I'm glad to be part of it.
And let me add to that is that, you know, the solicitors, the local prosecutors do an amazing job, and they are the backbone of the system. The law enforcement obviously are the backbone of the system. But I can say this, there's no place, even the U.S. Attorney's Office, there's no place like the Attorney General's office to do the things that you get to do and you can do. And if you want to make a difference, you know, this is a place. I mean, the things that we get to do, whether it's a case like this, public corruption, white collar, you know, cartel drugs, and then of course that's just part of it. You know, there's the appellate work, there's the post-conviction relief work. There's an entire civil section here. You know, this is a place that if you want to litigate, the sky's the limit there, and you can actually say, this is a problem I want to address, you know, and then go do that. It's just an amazing
So
opportunity.
what Creighton is basically saying is we have some vacancies there, and if you're a competent, capable lawyer, we have a job for you. Go to our website and apply. We'll put a file in your hand and send you into court.
But in all seriousness, I've been in this office since you hired me in 1998, and yes, it was. You know, and I've never left, but I've never gotten bored because I've had a chance to do so many different things here. I mean, and where else can you go and do that? I mean, where else can you go and do every level of state and federal court? You just can't do that anywhere else. And and then we had this opportunity to make a difference, and hopefully we have.
We did make a difference.
And he's a pretty good fellow.
Above average. As my mom says, not as good as most, but better than some.